The prince pulled her from a flooded river, then said, "I'm not letting go again." The church bell tolls. Hooves thunder across the muddy road as a poor seamstress gasps for breath, clinging to life. His strong arms save her, but in that single moment, the world changes. What should have been a fleeting rescue sparks whispers in the village, scandal in the manor, and fury in the royal court. Because the man who saved her is no ordinary traveler, he's the heir to the throne. She is just a seamstress. He's bound to a duchess. And yet he declares he will risk crown, country, and name for her. But when jewels vanish and false accusations rise, she is branded a thief before the watching kingdom. He swears to surrender his birthright rather than lose her. Will their love survive betrayal, scandal, and the weight of a kingdom's judgment? Or will the river that first bound them together be the same force that tears them apart? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Early spring sun cast long shadows across the muddy village streets as Elise Moreau adjusted the empty basket on her hip. The miller's wife had just accepted her mended clothes with a warm smile and extra loaf of bread, a kindness Elise treasured, knowing how it would please her ailing mother. "Mind yourself today, dear," the miller's wife called after her. "The river's higher than I've seen in years." Elise paused at the doorway, her worn shoes leaving small prints in the damp earth. "I must deliver the manor's gowns before nightfall," she said. Though worry creased her brow as she gazed at the swollen riverbanks in the distance. "The ladies await their finery for tomorrow's assembly." Whispers of concern followed her through the village square. Old Thomas, the carpenter, shook his head as she passed. "The thaw's come too quick this year, miss. Those waters are treacherous." But Elise pressed on, her sewing basket now strapped securely to her back, filled with carefully wrapped gowns she'd spent weeks perfecting. The manor's payment would see her mother through another month of medicines. She couldn't delay, not when so much depended on her punctuality. The usual crossing point had disappeared beneath the rushing waters. Elise bit her lip, searching the riverbank for a safer passage. A fallen tree stretched partway across at a narrower point, its branches trailing in the current. If she was careful, she tested her weight on the first few steps, clutching at the rough bark. The water roared beneath her, brown and angry with spring mud. Halfway across, a sudden surge lifted the tree trunk. Elise's foot slipped on the wet wood. The world tilted. The basket pulled her backward. In an instant, she was in the river's grip, the icy water stealing her breath. Her skirts tangled around her legs as she fought against the current. "Help!" she cried out, managing to grasp a low-hanging branch. "Please, Lord, help me!" The water pulled at her mercilessly, threatening to tear her grip loose with each passing moment. Through the spray and her own terror, she heard hoofbeats thundering along the bank. A figure appeared above her, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark traveling cloak. Without hesitation, the stranger leaped from his horse and plunged into the churning water. Strong arms encircled her waist. "Hold fast to me," a deep voice commanded near her ear. Elise clutched at his shoulders as he fought against the current, his powerful strokes carrying them both toward the bank. They collapsed onto the muddy shore, Elise coughing up river water while her rescuer kept a steadying hand on her shoulders. When she could finally breathe again, she found herself staring into eyes that held both concern and something, deeper something that made her heart flutter despite her ordeal. "I'm not letting go again," he declared, his voice rough with emotion. The words seemed strange from a stranger's lips, yet they stirred something profound in Elise's chest, like a half-remembered dream. "You're shivering," he said more gently, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders. "Please, allow me to see you safely home." As they walked through the village, Elise clutching the sodden remains of her sewing basket, she noticed the changing expressions of those they passed. Villagers stopped in their tracks, eyes widening at her companion's bearing. Though his clothes were now as wet as hers, there was no disguising the fine quality of his boots or the noble way he carried himself. Old Thomas dropped his wood-plane with a clatter. The baker's wife curtsied instinctively. Young children pointed and whispered behind their hands. Elise felt the weight of their stares, heard the first murmurs of gossip beginning to ripple through the gathered crowd. "Thank you, sir," she managed at last, her voice still shaky. "You risked your life for mine. I don't know how to repay such kindness." The stranger's eyes softened as he looked down at her, though worry still creased his noble brow. Elise couldn't help but notice how the wet cloth of his shirt clung to broad shoulders, or how his dark hair curled against his neck. She quickly lowered her gaze, conscious of the villager's attention and her own hammering heart. Sunlight crept through Elise's small window, rousing her from fitful dreams of rushing water. Every muscle in her body ached from yesterday's ordeal, but the fine gown still needed delivery. She forced herself to rise, wincing as she dressed in her simple brown work dress. "You need not go today," her mother called softly, from her bed in the corner. "Surely they will understand, after such a fright. We cannot afford to lose their custom." "Mother." Elise carefully wrapped the precious gowns in oilcloth. "Besides, the sun is bright, and the path is likely dried." Before she could gather her things, urgent knocking rattled their wooden door. A manor servant stood there, red-faced and breathless. "Miss Moreau, your presence is requested at the manor." At once, Elise's heart fluttered. Had word of yesterday's mishap reached the noble family? "Let me fetch the gowns." "No, miss. Just yourself, if you please." With haste, the walk to the manor seemed longer than usual, each step heavy with dread. The great hall buzzed with activity as Elise entered, servants scurrying, nobles in their finest morning dress, an air of excitement she had never before witnessed. Lord Renaud stood near the entrance, his thin lips curled in displeasure as she passed. "The seamstress arrives at last," he drawled, loud enough for others to hear. How fortunate she survived yesterday's single quotes adventure. Elise kept her eyes lowered, fighting the heat in her cheeks. The household gathered in a loose circle, and she found herself guided to stand near the front. Before she could wonder why, trumpet fanfare split the air. His Royal Highness Prince Frederick of Valmont! Elise's breath caught in her throat. Through the grand doors strode her rescuer from yesterday, but transformed. Gone were the plain traveling clothes, replaced by a coat of midnight blue trimmed with silver. His bearing was regal, his golden hair catching the morning light streaming through tall windows. The prince's eyes found her immediately, and a warm smile crossed his face. "Ah, Miss Moreau, I am pleased to see you well recovered from yesterday's tribulation." Whispers erupted around the hall. Ladies behind their fans, lords clearing their throats in disapproval. Elise felt the weight of every stare. "Your Highness," she managed, attempting a proper curtsy, despite her trembling knees. I had no idea, ... Indeed, that was my intention." Prince Frederick addressed the gathered crowd. "While traveling these provinces in modest dress, I witnessed something remarkable, a young woman who, despite the danger, showed admirable dedication to her duty. When misfortune struck, she faced it with courage that would humble many a soldier." More whispers, sharper now. A noblewoman's voice carried clearly. How convenient she was there when His Highness passed by. Titters of laughter followed. "Seeking attention." No doubt. Another added, "Look at her dress, hardly proper for court." Elise's vision blurred with unshed tears. She backed away one step, then another, until she stood near the servants' entrance. At the first proper moment, she slipped away, fleeing down familiar back corridors until she burst into the spring air. The day passed in a fog of worried thoughts and trembling hands as she worked. Every knock at the door, every passing voice made her start. By evening, the village hummed with the story. their humble seamstress, rescued by the crown prince himself. Some spoke with awe, others with suspicion. In her cottage that night, Elise knelt beside her bed, hands clasped tight. "Please," she whispered to the shadows, "let them forget me. Let my good name remain intact. I ask nothing more than to continue my quiet life." Across the village, high in the manor's finest guest chamber, Prince Frederick stood at the window. The moon silvered the now calm river where he had first seen her, soaked and frightened. Yes, but with a spirit that had called to something deep within him. Her voice echoed in his memory, earnest and clear, even in desperation. He touched the cold glass, remembering the warmth of her trembling form in his arms, and wondered why he could not seem to forget it. 2 days after the revelation at the manor, Elise sat at her worn wooden table, threading her needle by morning light. A sharp knock startled her, making the needle slip from her fingers. At her door stood a manor footman in crisp livery, holding out a cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. "From His Highness, Prince Frederick," the footman announced with a slight bow. "He requests your presence at the manor to repair his riding cloak." Elise's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. The paper felt rich and smooth against her work-roughened fingers. Inside, elegant script invited her to bring her sewing tools to the manor that afternoon. Her mother, watching from her chair by the hearth, pressed her lips together in worry. "I must go, Mother," Elise said softly. "We need the coin, and refusing a prince... She left the rest unsaid. "Be careful, child," her mother warned. "Fine folk play by different rules than we do. The walk to the manor seemed both too long and too short." Elise clutched her sewing basket close, her steps heavy with anxiety. The butler led her to a sunny parlor where Prince Frederick waited, his torn riding cloak draped over a chair. "Miss Moreau," he greeted her warmly, rising from his seat. "I'm grateful you've come. Your Highness," Elise curtsied deeply, keeping her eyes lowered as she set to work examining the tear in the fine wool cloth as she began to stitch. Frederick paced near the windows. "Tell me, Miss Moreau, what do you think of duty?" The question caught her off guard. She considered carefully while working her needle. "Duty is like this cloak, Your Highness. It can weigh heavy, but it also protects us and gives us purpose." An interesting thought. He paused his pacing. "And if duty conflicts with one's heart?" Elise's fingers stilled for a moment. "Then we must pray for wisdom to choose rightly, and courage to bear the consequences." Frederick moved closer, watching her work. "I am to be betrothed," he said quietly, "to the Duchess of Montclair. It will strengthen alliances, please the court, satisfy expectations. A noble match," Elise replied, though her heart quickened painfully. "Yet you speak of wisdom and courage." His voice held a note of yearning. "I see both in you, in how you care for the village children, in your honest labor." "Your Highness flatters me," Elise murmured, focusing on her stitches. "No flattery, only truth." He gestured to the garden doors. "Walk with me." The cloak can wait a moment. A maid immediately appeared to chaperone them, maintaining a discreet distance as they strolled the gravel paths between spring flowers. Frederick spoke of his travels, his hopes for the kingdom, his desire to understand his people's needs. Elise found herself sharing stories of village life, the miller's generosity during hard times, the widow who taught children their letters, the dignity she found in creating and mending beautiful things. From upper windows, servants and nobles alike watched their progress through the gardens. Whispers flew between them like sparrows, noting the prince's attentive manner. How often he drew near to hear Elise's quiet words. When the cloak was mended and the afternoon light began to fade, Elise hurried home, her mind spinning with confusion. The prince's kind eyes and earnest questions had touched something in her she dared not name. Yet she knew such feelings could only lead to heartbreak. That evening, unable to settle, she walked to the village inn for a measure of thread. The courtyard clattered with the arrival of an elegant carriage bearing the Montclair crest. A richly dressed steward descended, brushing road dust from his coat. "Make ready," he announced to the gathering crowd. The Duchess of Montclair arrives within the week to formalize her betrothal to His Highness, Prince Frederick. The finest rooms must be prepared. Elise stood frozen in the shadows, her heart turning to lead in her chest. The steward's words confirmed what she had known all along. There could be no place for a seamstress's daughter in a prince's life. She turned away, letting the evening mist hide the tears that threatened to fall. Morning sunlight streamed through the cottage windows, but it brought little warmth to Elise's spirit. Her fingers moved mechanically over her sewing as she tried to forget the steward's words from the previous evening. The Duchess of Montclair. Of course, the prince would marry a duchess. It was the natural order of things. The knock at her door came without warning. Elise looked up from her work, needle poised mid-stitch. When she opened the door, her heart nearly stopped. Prince Frederick stood before her, dressed simply but still unmistakably royal in his bearing. Behind him, a single guard maintained a respectful distance near the garden gate. "Your Highness," Elise curtsied deeply, conscious of curious eyes peeking from neighboring windows. "This is most unexpected. Please, when we're alone, call me Frederick." His voice was warm but troubled. "May I come in?" Elise glanced anxiously at her mother's empty chair she had gone to. Mark it, but propriety demanded she leave the door open. She gestured him inside, keenly aware of their difference in station as he ducked through the low doorway. "I must speak with you about the rumors you've surely heard," Frederick said, remaining standing in her humble main room. "About the Duchess of Montclair. Your Highness, it's not my place to. It is entirely your place," he interrupted gently, "because I feel nothing for her. The arrangement was my father's doing, but my heart ... double quotes. He paused, his gaze intense. "My heart is drawn elsewhere." Elise's fingers twisted in her apron. "Please, Your Highness, I'm but a seamstress. Such words between us could only lead to scandal and ruin for us both. Then let me show you something." He extended his hand. "Will you accompany me to the parish church? I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will remain untarnished." Against her better judgment, Elise found herself walking beside him through the village, his guard following at a discreet distance. The morning air was crisp, and Frederick's presence drew every eye in the street. At the church, they found Father Thomas overseeing the distribution of bread to families affected by the flood. Without hesitation, Frederick removed his fine coat and began helping. Elise watched, transfixed, as the prince of the realm knelt beside dirty-faced children, listening to their stories and offering comfort with genuine warmth. "Your Grace," one tiny girl sniffled, "the water took my doll. Then we shall have to find you another, shall we not?" Frederick replied, producing a small coin from his pocket and pressing it into her palm. The child's face lit up with joy. Elise felt her resistance crumbling as she observed his gentle interaction with her people. This was no act. His compassion shone genuine and bright. As the afternoon waned, Frederick escorted her home. The guard lit a lantern as darkness fell, its glow casting dancing shadows on the cottage walls. Near her doorway, Frederick reached into his vest pocket. "I have something for you," he said softly, withdrawing a delicate silver locket. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Elise discovered a tiny painted cross inside, its colors rich and detailed. "Your Highness, I cannot accept." "You can, and you must." His voice was firm but tender. "Elise, listen to me well. I would rather live as a pauper with you by my side than rule all the kingdoms of the earth without you. This I swear before God and man." Tears pricked at Elise's eyes as she allowed him to fasten the chain around her neck. The locket felt cool against her skin as she tucked it beneath her bodice. Out of sight, but impossible to ignore, like her feelings for the prince himself. You speak of impossible things, she whispered, though her heart soared at his words. Nothing is impossible with faith, Frederick replied, his eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Remember that, Elise. She watched him leave, the silver locket burning like a coal of joy and fear against her heart. As she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't stop her fingers from straying to its smooth surface, wondering if she dared believe in impossible things. The royal courier's arrival at the manor sent ripples of excitement through the halls. His boots echoed on the marble floors as servants guided him to Prince Frederick's chambers. The sealed letter he carried bore the unmistakable mark of King Charles himself. Frederick broke the seal with steady hands, but his face grew troubled as he read. The king demanded his return to court within 2 weeks' time. The news spread quickly through the manor and into the village, carried on whispered voices. "Mark my words," said one washerwoman to another as they scrubbed linens. "The prince will forget all about our Elise once he's back among the fine ladies of court." "'Tis the way of nobles," her companion agreed, wringing out a sheet. They'd play at love with common folk, then return to their own kind, but they did not know Frederick's heart. That very evening, he sat at his writing desk, candlelight dancing across parchment as he composed a letter to his father. His quill moved with purpose as he petitioned for the right to choose his own bride, arguing that true nobility lay in character rather than birth. When he told Elise of his petition, she paled. They stood in the manor's garden, chaperoned by an elderly housekeeper who pretended not to listen. "Your Highness must not risk his position for my sake," Elise protested, her hands trembling. "The kingdom needs you. The kingdom needs a ruler who understands the hearts of all his people," Frederick replied. He took her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "I give you my word, I will find a way for us to be together." The day of his departure dawned gray and cool. As his horse was prepared, Frederick made one last promise to Elise. "Keep faith," he whispered. "My heart remains here with you." For 7 days, the village buzzed with speculation. Some praised Elise's modest dignity, while others questioned her wisdom in entertaining a prince's attention. Elise continued her work, sewing by day and praying by night, until the messengers arrived from the capital. They brought the king's reply, proclaimed in the village square. His Majesty would consider allowing the match, but only if Elise proved her worth exceeded that of noble birth. The test he set was unexpected. Prince Frederick and Elise must work together to rebuild the flood-damaged cottages, showing whether their love sprang from true charity or mere ambition. The villagers gathered to hear the proclamation, their reactions as varied as summer weather. Old Thomas the carpenter nodded approvingly. "Honest work reveals honest hearts," he declared. But Lady Pembroke, visiting from a neighboring estate, sniffed behind her fan. A prince doing manual labor? Preposterous. The village children watched wide-eyed as Frederick removed his fine coat and rolled up his sleeves, ready to begin. Elise tied back her hair with a simple ribbon, her face set with quiet determination. "We'll see if the prince's soft hands can lift a hammer," muttered one skeptical farmer. "And whether the seamstress can manage more than threading needles," whispered another. But Elise paid no mind to the whispers. That evening, she knelt in the village church, the silver locket Frederick had given her pressed against her heart. Candles flickered before the altar, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Her prayers were simple but fervent, asking not for success or status, but for strength to face whatever trials lay ahead. The gentle glow of candlelight illuminated her bowed head as she prayed for courage to endure the stares of nobles who thought her presumptuous, courage to face villagers who might resent her elevation, and courage to prove that love could bridge the deepest divides of society. In the quiet of the church, with only the soft sputter of candles and the distant sound of evening bells, Elise found a moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she drew comfort from the sacred silence and the knowledge that somewhere, Frederick, too, was working toward their shared future. Dawn painted the sky in gentle brushstrokes of pink and gold as Elise made her way to the flood-ravaged section of the village. Her sewing basket hung heavy at her side, filled with needles, thread, and fabric for mending bedding. The sight that greeted her made her heart squeeze. Prince Frederick was already there, his fine coat cast aside, rolling up his sleeves beside a stack of fresh-cut timber. The villagers gathered cautiously, keeping their distance. Many crossed their arms and whispered behind raised hands, clearly distrustful of this noble who claimed he would work alongside them. Elise understood their skepticism. Princes didn't normally swing hammers or carry lumber. "Good morrow," Frederick called out warmly to the assembled crowd. "Shall we begin?" While Frederick set to work with the other men, Elise gathered the village children under a broad oak tree. She spread blankets on the ground and began teaching them their letters, while her needle flew through the torn bedding that needed mending. The little ones traced shapes in the dirt with sticks, giggling when she praised their efforts. "Look there," one woman muttered to another, pointing toward Frederick. "His Royal Highness has already smashed his thumb with the hammer twice." Indeed, the prince's inexperience showed in his awkward handling of the tools, but his determination never wavered. By mid-morning, sweat darkened his shirt and blisters formed on his palms, yet he kept working. The village men's expressions slowly shifted from scorn to reluctant respect as they watched him struggle but persist. Near noon, Elise and Frederick found themselves working together to carry bricks for a chimney. When Frederick stumbled, sending several tumbling, Elise couldn't help but laugh at his dismayed expression. "I don't recall this being part of your princely education," she teased gently. "Indeed not," he chuckled, bending to retrieve the fallen bricks. Though perhaps it should have been. Their shared laughter drew curious glances from passing villagers. More than one person noticed how their eyes lingered on each other, how their hands brushed accidentally as they worked side by side. In the afternoon, they encountered Widow Matthews, whose son had been lost to the floodwaters 2 months prior. The elderly woman stood in the doorway of her ruined home, tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. Without hesitation, Elise wrapped her arms around the widow's trembling shoulders. To everyone's surprise, Frederick set down his tools and joined them. He listened intently as the widow spoke of her son, then promised personally that her cottage would be the next they restored. His genuine compassion touched something in the villagers watching. Here was a prince who truly cared about their suffering. As word spread of the prince's dedicated labor, nobles from the manor rode past in their fine carriages, noses wrinkled in distaste. Lady Pembroke was overhead saying, "How dreadfully common. A prince should not dirty his hands so." But their disapproval only seemed to strengthen Frederick's resolve. He spent more time in the village cottages than in the manor's grand halls. Servants whispered about how he took his meals with the workers, sharing their simple bread and cheese instead of dining at the Lord's table. The villagers' attitude transformed as the days passed. Children ran to greet the prince each morning, showing him their improving letters. Women left cups of cool water where he worked. Men clapped him on the shoulder and offered advice about handling tools properly. More telling was how they watched him with Elise, the way his eyes followed her as she moved among the villagers, teaching and mending and comforting. How she seemed to sense when he needed encouragement, appearing at his side with a gentle word or smile. Their love grew visible in countless small gestures, a steadying hand, a shared glance, a moment of quiet laughter. As dusk approached, newly repaired chimneys sent thin streams of smoke into the deepening sky. Elise and Frederick stood together, watching the village come back to life around them. Their hands brushed, fingers intertwining briefly before propriety demanded they step apart. "I'm not letting go again," Frederick whispered, echoing his words from the day he'd pulled her from the flood. The promise in his voice made Elise's heart flutter, even as she tried to remember all the reasons they couldn't be together. but watching the smoke rise from the chimneys they'd helped rebuild. Seeing the village children waving goodbye as they headed home for supper, Elise felt hope rising in her chest like those tendrils of smoke, delicate but persistent, reaching toward heaven. 3 days of joyful labor had passed like a dream, but now the manor buzzed with nervous energy as servants prepared for the court's inspection. Elise climbed the worn stone steps, her trusted sewing basket tucked under her arm. The familiar weight of needles and thread gave her comfort as she entered through the servants' door, nodding to the kitchen maids, who smiled warmly at her now familiar presence. The great hall stretched before her, its rafters draped with faded banners that needed mending before the king's emissary arrived. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. Elise settled herself in a quiet corner, spreading her work across a wooden table as her nimble fingers began their familiar dance with needle and thread. She had barely finished her first repair when the thunder of boots echoed through the corridor. The heavy doors burst open, and palace guards stormed in, their faces stern beneath gleaming helmets. Behind them swept the Duchess of Montclair, her silk skirts rustling with barely contained fury. There. The Duchess pointed one elegant finger at Elise. Search her belongings. Before Elise could protest, rough hands seized her basket, appending its contents. Gasps filled the air as gleaming jewels tumbled out from beneath her neatly folded fabric scraps, rubies and diamonds that caught the light like drops of frozen fire. No. Elise's heart crashed against her ribs. Those aren't mine. I'd never seen them before. The Duchess's laugh cut like ice. Of course you'd say that, you conniving little snake. These gems are part of my dowry collection, reported missing just this morning. Nobles who had gathered at the commotion whispered behind raised hands, their eyes gleaming with malicious delight. A thief in seamstress's clothing, one lady murmured. How perfectly common. She sought to win the prince's heart and steal a fortune besides, another added. What remarkable ambition for one so low-born. Guards seized Elise's arms, their grip bruising as they dragged her toward the manor's great hall where the court had assembled. Her feet barely touched the ground as they hurried her along polished corridors, tears streaming down her face. The hall fell silent as she was thrust before the king's emissary, a stern-faced man who sat in judgment from a carved chair on the dais. Prince Frederick stood nearby, his face draining of color as he saw Elise in custody. What is the meaning of this? Frederick's voice cracked like thunder in the hushed chamber. The Duchess stepped forward, every inch the wronged noblewoman. This creature has been caught stealing my jewels, precious heirlooms meant to secure our betrothal. Impossible. Frederick strode to Elise's side. I know her heart. She is incapable of such deceit. The emissary raised his hand for silence. Your Highness, the evidence is clear. Gems from the Duchess's collection were found among her possessions. They were planted there. Frederick's fist crashed against the table. Can you not see this is a plot to discredit her? Courtiers pressed forward, their voices rising in a cacophony of condemnation. The throne must be protected from such scheming. Let her serve as an example. Justice must be swift. Through it all, Elise kept her eyes downcast, tears falling silently. Her lips moved in silent prayer, not for herself, but for Frederick. She could bear any punishment, but she could not bear to see him throw away his birthright for her sake. The emissary's voice cut through the chaos. Take her to the manors, holding chamber until this matter can be fully investigated. As guards led her away, Elise caught one last glimpse of Frederick's anguished face. The descent to the manor's lower levels felt endless, the stone walls closing in until they reached a small, cold chamber lit only by a single torch in the corridor beyond. The heavy door clanged shut, leaving Elise alone in the shadows. Outside, she could hear Frederick's boots striking stone as he paced, his voice carrying through the thick wood. I swear by all that's holy, I will uncover the truth. Hold fast, my love. Hold fast. Dawn broke over the manor with streaks of pale gold piercing through gray clouds. The courtyard slowly filled as villagers and nobles gathered, their whispers echoing off the stone walls. Guards in polished armor stood at attention, their expressions stern beneath their helmets. Elise stood in the center of the courtyard, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the rich velvets and silks of the nobility. Though her hands trembled slightly, she held her head high, drawing strength from the silver cross hidden beneath her collar. The king's emissary, Lord Beaumont, sat at a raised table, his dark eyes sharp as he surveyed the assembled crowd. Elise Moreau, his voice rang out. You stand accused of theft and deception. The Duchess of Montclair's jewels were found among your belongings. How do you answer these charges? Elise's voice, though soft, carried clearly across the hushed courtyard. My lord, I am innocent. I have lived by honest work all my days. These hands have known only needle and thread, not theft. She raised her calloused palms. I trust that truth will prevail, for God sees all hearts. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The villagers who had watched her grow up, who had seen her care for her widowed mother, nodded in support. But the nobles sneered, their fans fluttering like angry birds as they whispered about upstart peasants who didn't know their place. Prince Frederick strode forward, his boots striking the cobblestones with purpose. His face was pale with anger, but his voice remained steady. Lord Beaumont, I have worked alongside this woman. I have seen her give her last crust to hungry children. She would sooner sell her own clothes than steal from another. Your Highness. Lord Beaumont's tone was carefully measured. Your attachment to the accused is well known, but evidence speaks louder than sentiment. Frederick's eyes blazed. Then hear this evidence. I, Frederick of Valmont, heir to the throne, do hereby declare that if Elise Moreau is condemned without proof, I will relinquish my claim to the crown. The courtyard erupted. Villagers cheered, their voices bouncing off the manor walls. God bless the prince, they shouted. He sees true. Noble ladies swooned in shock, while their husbands muttered darkly about scandal and tradition. Silence. Lord Beaumont thundered, rising to his feet. But before he could speak further, trumpet blasts cut through the chaos. The great gates swung open, revealing a magnificent procession. King Charles himself had arrived, his golden crown catching the morning light. The crowd parted like water as the king's carriage rolled into the courtyard. Servants scrambled to lay down carpets, while nobles hastily smoothed their clothes and bowed deeply. The king descended, his face grave beneath his silver beard. What is this I hear? His voice filled the space. My son threatens to abandon his birthright for a seamstress? His eyes fell on Elise, who immediately sank into a deep curtsy. Father, Frederick stepped forward. I fight not just for Elise, but for justice itself. How can I rule a kingdom if I cannot protect an innocent subject from false accusation? The king's expression remained unreadable as he surveyed the scene, his son standing tall and defiant, Elise kneeling with quiet dignity, the divided crowd watching with bated breath. This matter requires careful consideration, he announced finally. I will hear all evidence at tomorrow's dawn. Until then, the accused will return to her chamber under guard. As guards led her away, Elise caught Frederick's eye. In that brief glance past all the fear and love, they dared not speak aloud. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving the courtyard to lengthening shadows dot in her chamber that night. Elise knelt beside her narrow bed. The stone floor was cold through her skirts, and she shivered despite the spring evening. Her prayers rose, like incense in the darkness, carrying all her hopes and fears heavenward. Across the hall, in his own chambers, Frederick paced like a caged lion. His whispered words carried the force of an oath. By all that is holy, I will move heaven itself before I let you suffer unjustly, my beloved. This I swear, the matter settled. into uneasy silence, waiting for dawn to bring either justice or heartbreak. "My lords, please, I beg you to listen." A young maid burst through the crowd, her apron askew and her face flushed from running. "I have seen the truth with my own eyes." The assembly fell silent as the maid Agnes dropped into a clumsy curtsy before the king's emissary. Her voice trembled but grew stronger as she spoke. It was Lord Hastings who planted the jewels in Mistress Moreau's basket. "I saw him do it with my own eyes, I did." Frederick stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Speak freely, child. You are under my protection." Agnes wrung her hands in her apron. "2 nights past, I was cleaning the corridors late. I heard Lord Hastings speaking with another about how the prince's defiance of tradition must be stopped. He said he would make sure the common seamstress would be ruined." The courtyard erupted in gasps and murmurs. Lord Hastings, a thin man with a hawk-like nose, turned pale. "Lies! These are nothing but peasant lies." The king raised his hand for silence. "Search Lord Hastings' chambers. Immediately." Guards moved swiftly, their boots echoing on the stone steps. The crowd waited in tense silence, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and whispered prayers. Within minutes, shouts rang out from above. "Your Majesty." A guard captain appeared at the balcony. "We found more stolen items hidden in a false bottom of his trunk. Jewels, gold pieces, and letters revealing his plot." Lord Hastings turned to flee, but was seized by 2 guards. They dragged him before the king, forcing him to his knees. His fine silk doublet was crumpled, his carefully arranged wig askew. "Release her." The king's voice rang with authority. "Release Mistress Moreau at once." The guards unlocked Elise's shackles. She swayed slightly, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Frederick crossed the courtyard in 3 long strides and gathered her in his arms, holding her close before the stunned assembly. "My son," the king spoke, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. "These past days I have watched. I have seen how this young woman has conducted herself with grace and dignity far beyond her station. I have witnessed your willingness to sacrifice everything for love and justice." He stood, his purple robes catching the morning light. "I have been blind. True nobility lies not in birth, but in virtue, in courage, in compassion." His gaze swept across the assembly. "The betrothal to the Duchess of Montclair is hereby dissolved. Prince Frederick and Mistress Moreau have my blessing to wed." The nobles shifted uneasily, their jewels glinting as they whispered among themselves. But from the village folk came a great cheer that echoed off the manor walls. The miller's wife wiped tears from her eyes. The blacksmith's children danced in circles. Frederick turned to Elise, his eyes shining with joy. "My love," he whispered, touching her cheek gently. At last, Elise smiled through her tears. "I never dared dream of this moment." The morning sun broke fully through the clouds as Frederick took Elise's hand. Together, they walked through the manor courtyard while the church bells began to ring, their joyful pealing carrying across the village. Villagers threw flower petals in their path, and even some of the nobles began to smile, won over by the pure joy radiating from the couple. The silver cross at Elise's throat caught the sunlight as she walked beside her prince, their fingers intertwined, their love proven true before all. The bells continued to ring, celebrating not just their union, but the triumph of true nobility, the nobility of the heart. The morning sun painted the village in shades of gold as bells rang out from the parish church. After 3 weeks of banns being read from the pulpit, the wedding day of Prince Frederick and Elise Moreau had finally arrived. Villagers lined the narrow streets, their best clothes brushed and mended for the occasion. Noble carriages rolled past humble carts, while children scattered flower petals along the path to the church steps. Inside her small cottage, Elise smoothed the folds of her wedding gown, a creation of her own making. The simple white silk, borrowed from a bolt gifted by the king himself, flowed like water, adorned only with delicate embroidery she had stitched by candlelight. Her mother fastened the silver locket containing the tiny cross around her neck, tears glistening in her eyes. "You look like an angel, my dear," the parish priest said warmly as he arrived to escort her. Father Thomas had known Elise since she was a child, had seen her faith tested and strengthened through years of hardship. Now he would walk her down the aisle in place of her late father Dot at the church door. Elise paused, her heart fluttering. Through the open doorway, she could see Frederick waiting at the altar. He wore his formal uniform, yet without the usual gilt and medals, a deliberate choice to show humility before God and the people. His eyes found hers across the crowded nave, and his smile drove away all her nervousness. The congregation rose as Father Thomas led Elise down the aisle. Nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with village folk, their differences forgotten in the sacred moment. Even those who had once sneered at her common birth now bowed their heads in respect. King Charles himself stood near the altar, his stern features softened with approval as he watched his son's face shine with joy. The king had come to see that true nobility dwelled in the heart, not in titles or lands. His presence today blessed not only the union but also a new understanding between classes. Frederick took Elise's hands in his as they faced each other before the altar. His fingers trembled slightly as he spoke his vows, promising to cherish her in poverty or plenty, in sickness and health. Elise's clear voice rang with certainty as she pledged her own faith, her words simple yet profound. When they emerged into the sunlight as husband and wife, the cheers nearly drowned out the pealing bells. Children sang hymns while village women wiped tears from their eyes. The miller's wife, who had once doubted Elise's chances, now beamed with pride for the village girl who had won a prince's heart through virtue alone. Tables groaned under the weight of the wedding feast, spread out in the village square. Here was perhaps the most remarkable sight of all. Nobles and servants, merchants and farmers, all seated together as equals. The king himself raised a cup in toast to the bride and groom, declaring that love knew no boundaries of rank or station. As evening drew near, lanterns were lit throughout the square. Musicians played while couples danced, laughter and joy filling the air. Elise and Frederick slipped away quietly, walking hand in hand toward the river where their story had begun. The water flowed peaceful and clear now, so different from the raging torrent of that spring day. Frederick drew Elise close, the silver locket gleaming against her wedding gown. His voice was tender as he whispered the words that had marked the beginning of their love. "I'm not letting go again." Elise smiled up at her husband, her heart full. Here by the riverside, under God's heaven, a prince and a seamstress had found something rare and precious, a love pure enough to bridge any divide, strong enough to change hearts, and true enough to last forever. The lantern light danced on the water as they stood together, their story a testament to the power of genuine affection to overcome all obstacles. In their union, both noble and common folk could see hope for a world where character mattered more than birth, and where love could indeed conquer all. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.